Scammers are stealing billions of dollars from America's seniors, and they're ramping up their efforts. With calls, texts, or clicks, they can steal a senior's entire life savings. But we have the power to stop these criminals. AARP is fighting for bipartisan, common-sense solutions to protect older Americans' hard-earned money from scammers. Join us today. Visit action.aarp.org/fraud pledge. Paid for by AARP.
Welcome to the program. No Victocrats allowed because we've got a country to save. So let's get her teed up!
You want to play what? Say hello to my little friend.
What the hell's going on out here?
Ooh, that's a bingo.
888-971-SAGE. 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are sailing the news channel. President Donald J. Trump said the Iranian boat threatening the Strait of Hormuz will be fired upon. Lebanon's ambassador to the United States thanks President for, quote, helping to make Lebanon great again, close quote. We will interview Dr. Stephen Meyer, featured in the documentary The Story of Everything, which is about the origin of life and the universe, and ask the question, is there any plausible explanation other than that there is a creator for the creation of life and the universe? President Trump signs off on the largest drop in prescription drug history. Neither CNN nor MSNBC all covered the event, and you wonder why Donald Trump has such low ratings when it comes to affordability. The California governor's debate shows if Gavin Newsom's successor is a Democrat, he or she will be just as bad, if not worse. Chuck Schumer defends the Southern Poverty Law Center against the indictment filed against it by the DOJ. Get this, the far-left residents of New York's East Village, who voted over 70% for Zohran Mamdani, are suing Mamdani for attempting to put a homeless shelter in their neighborhood. And anti-Semitism is still a big problem at Harvard. All of this and more, 888-971-SAGE. And dissent, of course, is welcome. Happy Friday, everybody. Feel free to call up about whatever is on your mind. Maybe something we didn't get to this week, maybe something that you have a question about, some topic you think deserves more discussion. 888-971-7243, 888-971-SAGE. And, of course, the Mark line is open. Bibi Netanyahu says he's cancer-free after an early diagnosis of prostate cancer. He said he delayed disclosing the diagnosis due to the possibility of it being used as propaganda during the conflict with Iran. Quote, I requested to delay its publication by 2 months so it would not be released at the height of the war in order not to allow the Iranian terror regime to spread even more false propaganda against Israel. He said it was caught at a very early stage. The tumor was less than a centimeter, had not spread. He's 76 years old, and he is told that this is very common among men his age. Remember that lawsuit that the Trump administration filed against the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, over the cost overruns for the new building? Republican Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina said he was not going to confirm Trump's nominee until he dropped what he considered to be a vindictive and stupid lawsuit. It was vindictive and it was stupid, and President Trump has now dropped it. Before I get to Iran, Zohran Mamdani got a lot of votes from the far-left residents of East Village. They gave him a 40-point election vote margin. He got over 70% of their votes. And now they're suing him. Why? Because he wants to put a homeless shelter in their neighborhood. Ted Cruz posted this on X. The news of the lawsuit has prompted conservative mockery online, with figures like Senator Ted Cruz noting the irony of Mamdani's supporters turning on the fruits of his administration. Oops, Ted Cruz said in a post on X. Michael Henry, a former New York AG candidate, said no one is more not in my backyard than white progressives. The community voted for Mamdani in a landslide, but don't want to live with the consequences, end of quote. The residents, why am I laughing, of East Village have joined with an organization called Voice to sue Mamdani over the plan to use a building to house the homeless. They say the city failed the proper environmental and legal guidelines. The lawsuit says, quote, it challenges the city's hastily made and legally invalid decision to locate a new citywide homeless adult male intake center at 8 East 3rd Street without following any of the legal requirements that must precede such a significant and consequential decision, end of quote. What did you think was going to happen? And wait until he freezes the rent on some 2 million residents in New York City. What do you see what that does to the cost of rent in New York City? What do you see what that does to creating a disincentive to build more housing in New York City? How did you vote for this clown? Because he's got a nice smile? Because he seems warm and friendly and relaxed? Because he said, and I'm paraphrasing, we're going to embrace the warm cocoon of socialism rather than the cold, harsh, rugged individualism of capitalism. What did you think was going to happen? What do you think made New York City? Marxists? Socialists? People engaging in activity in order to make a profit. But profit has become a four-letter word with people like Mamdani, who has a, by the way, multi-million-dollar spread in Uganda that he has on Airbnb. You should check it out. As far as I know, there's no freeze on what he's charging people for renting out that palatial complex. What did you think was going to happen? Same thing out here with California. The lawmakers, in their infinite wisdom, passed a law boosting the wages of fast food workers to $20 an hour, a substantial increase over what they were getting before. The day that Gavin Newsom signed the bill, months before it went into effect, Pizza Hut laid off 1,200 drivers that day. Just like that, boom. 1,200 drivers lost their jobs. Now, it seems to me, if I'm one of these left-wing lawmakers, either in the state Senate or the state assembly that signed this bill and voted for this bill, it might have said to myself, wow, maybe we went too far. Fast forward. Study, by the way, from researchers at University of California, Santa Cruz. Higher menu prices, less hourly work, more automation, detailed in a report. By the way, there's another report from Beacon Economics, working paper from UC Berkeley. Quote, headline, economists warn California not to raise the minimum wage to $20. They were wrong in almost every way, another economist said. So it's been my experience, having talked about the minimum wage for decades. No matter what happens, there'll be some economist coming up with a study that says just the opposite. So what do? Use common sense. My father, as you know, had a cafe near downtown L.A. And because he was a small outfit, the minimum wage hikes did not affect him, at least not directly. But when you raise the minimum wage, it puts pressure on the exempt companies to increase the minimum wage because they won't be able to get workers. So even though my father, because of the number of workers he had, which is below the level, was not affected, at least not directly, he had to raise his wages to attract people because otherwise they'd go somewhere else. And what did he do to offset that increase? Because labor is about 50% of the cost when you're running a restaurant, as it is when you're running most businesses. He increased the prices. And when he increased the prices, what happened? Sales fell off, at least for a period of time before they came back. Common sense. If somebody is forcing you to increase the cost of labor, you got to make it up some other way. Profit margins are very, very thin in the fast food business. And the average person who owns a fast food outlet is not somebody that has 10, 15, 20 of them. It's mom and pop with one or maybe two. And their margins are very thin. And they're not working 40 hours a week. They're working 60 or 80 hours a week. So all you're doing is creating an incentive not to hire or to delay a hiring decision, or to cut hours, to raise the prices of the menu, which will disproportionately affect poor people and people on fixed income. That's what you've done. So that's what the UC Berkeley study said. None of that stuff happened. The UC Santa Cruz study said the opposite. Driven higher menu prices. Have you noticed that? Less hourly work. Have you noticed that? And a greater incentive for more automation. Economists said California lawmakers have continued to push ahead with wage increases throughout the state, even though this has been the result. Mayor Karen Bass is mandating that airport and hotel workers' hourly wages be increased to $30 by 2028. What do you think that will do? Yet you still pull the lever for these brain-dead people who've never even so much as run a hot dog stand. We're going to talk about Operation Epic Fury and where it stands when we come back. 888-971-SAGE. I am Larry Elder. Do not leave town. Parents, the biggest question in education today is how artificial intelligence is shaping the way your student learns. Artificial intelligence is changing education faster than most schools are willing to admit, and many families are rightly concerned. At Patrick Henry College, the goal isn't to outsource thinking to machines. It's to train students to think for themselves. PHC emphasizes a Christian liberal arts education that develops reasoning, writing, speaking, and discernment skills no algorithm can replace. Students learn to engage technology wisely, understanding its capabilities, but also its danger and limitations, rather than becoming dependent on it. In a world increasingly shaped by AI, Patrick Henry College prepares students to lead with wisdom, conviction, and moral clarity. If you want a college that prepares your child to lead in an AI-driven world without losing his or her faith and values, I encourage you to learn more about Patrick Henry College. Visit phc.edu/elder. That's phc.edu/elder. 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. Joseph is in Manhattan, New York City. Joseph, you're on the Larry Elder Show.
We love you, Persia. Oh, yes, we do. We love you, Ukraine. Oh, yes, we do. Life, liberty, voice. We have a country to save. Oh, Persia and Ukraine. God bless you. Thank you, Larry.
You got it, Joseph. Joseph, don't quit your day job. Sam is in Riverside, California. Sam, you're on the Larry Elder Show.
Professor Elder.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, buddy?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, good. I just want to commend your friend, Mark, for always willing to call and take an intellectual beating the way he does. Especially after his last call. I want him to know I'm waiting to hear what he has to say after making that comment about Israel committing genocide. You quoted that study, and we haven't heard back. But I do want to commend him for his continued efforts, and I believe he's going to be another Alan Dershowitz who finally smartened up.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of time. I can tell his knees are getting wobbly. If you weren't listening, what Sam is referring to is an exchange I had with our friend Mark, where I told him that the majority of Palestinians support Hamas and support the atrocity that happened on October the 7th. He said he didn't believe that was true. And I said, well, we're making some progress, Mark, so if I can prove to you that it is true, will you change your mind? And he said he would. And read him polls showing that the majority of Palestinians, we're talking about people living in Gaza and in the West Bank, support Hamas. Majority of Palestinians support what happened on October the 7th. And then I quoted him the charter from Hamas, which he admitted he had not read. It was from 1988. They revised it a few years later and watered down the language a little bit, but the intent is still the same, and talked about killing Jews. Not just the ones in Israel, all over the world. So this is what we're dealing with. And I think a lot of people like Mark, and Mark is not an idiot. He's a very intelligent guy. And the reason I know he's intelligent is because he listens to the show, And smart people who have their ideas challenged listen to programs where people say things with which they disagree, because an idea is like a tea bag. It's challenged in hot water. And the fact that Mark is a regular listener of the show tells me that he's concerned about making sure his ideas can withstand scrutiny. A lot of people don't have the nerve to do that. It's difficult having ideas challenged. It's difficult when I watch CNN, which I do regularly, so you don't have to. It's difficult when I watch MSNBC, which I do, so you don't have to. It's difficult when I listen to NPR, so you don't have to. It's tough hearing nonsense. It's tough hearing somebody talk about how we need to have the minimum wage because it's just social justice. You're busting your butt running a business with a very thin margin, and some person comes along who's never run a business, who's a social justice warrior, telling you essentially that you're underpaying your workers. If I'm underpaying my workers, how am I getting workers? And how am I keeping them if I'm underpaying them? The whole thing is an affront. Getting back to this study real quick before we get to Iran. You know, this study, UC Berkeley, says that everything that people said was going to happen after that law was passed didn't happen. People didn't lose jobs. People didn't lose hours. And then you have studies, at least two of them, that said 10,000 jobs were lost. One of them said 12,000 jobs were lost. How is it that you can have a study that says no jobs were lost and the one that says 10,000? How can that be? For the Santa Cruz study, researchers interviewed business owners and managers of more than 100 fast food franchises throughout California. They looked at their business and financial hiring records. They interviewed owners of 3 independent restaurants to learn the impact of the minimum wage on their daily operations. Quote, here's the researcher. Based on what we found, I think this legislation is a classic case of no good deed goes unpunished. There are unintended consequences and knock-on effects. And overall, I think the results have definitely not been as positive as policymakers had been expecting, end of quote. One of my good friends, Ron Salisbury, owns a number of restaurants in California, including the El Cholo franchise, and talked to me about what happens when they raise the minimum wage, what it does to prices, what it does to hours, what it does to his hiring decisions. Some years ago, the then mayor of L.A. was contemplating raising the minimum wage. So he invited a bunch of small business owners to come into his office and discuss this. And someone called me who attended that meeting. I wasn't there. And they said, we all brought our P&Ls, our profit and loss statements. And by the way, the then mayor had attended the London School of Economics. He studied humanities or something. I forget what it was. He didn't study economics. But you'd think maybe he might pick up something by osmosis, but apparently he didn't. So we all told him how thin our profit margins are, how competitive the business is, that labor costs are roughly half of our costs. And he listened, and he stood up, buttoned his coat, and said, I think you can absorb the increase. And he walked out. Now, to my knowledge, he's never run a hot dog stand. Maybe a lemonade stand when he was a little kid, but I don't know. I'll put somebody on that and find out. These people are amazing. Zohran Mamdani, I want to freeze rents. What do you think it does for somebody who's a builder? When I was running for governor, I met a number of builders, contractors. Many of them were building in Utah, building in Nevada, not building in California because it takes too long. And then they have all sorts of rules and regulations, including making you build low-cost housing in the same building. What does that even mean? The environmental regulations, environmental impact statement that you have to do because of the environmental extremists here in California, all of which jacks up the cost of housing to the point where we're paying double the cost of housing compared to the average price of a home in America. Double. And Leo Hanian, the economist at UCLA, has done a lot on real estate, says in California, because of the earthquakes, the average price of a home should be about 10 to 15% higher. No higher. But not double. And these people never sit down, never talk to anybody with whom they disagree, and to open their eyes to say, maybe, just maybe, we got this wrong. The only person who said that of the Democrat candidates for governor, the prominent ones, was a two-term mayor of L.A., Antonio Villaraigosa, who said publicly, the affordability problem we have in California is because of us Democrats. We need to rethink our direction. And he wasn't one of the ones invited to the debate a couple of days ago. That's too bad. The only one up there who's willing to say, maybe, just maybe, we got that wrong. 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. Do not leave town.
Just the two of us building big castles way on high. Just the two of us, you and I.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. We're going to talk about the state of Operation Epic Fury in just a few minutes. One more thing about the minimum wage increase. Zohran Mamdani wants to increase the minimum wage to $30 in New York. The current is $17. I already told you what happened here in California when the legislature and the governor signed an increase for the minimum wage for fast food workers. AOC, as you know, was a waiter or bartender at a restaurant in New York called the Coffee House, which was depicted in Sex and the City. And it closed. And the co-owner said one of the reasons was the increase in the minimum wage law. So the very place where AOC worked, because of policies that she and her party pursue, caused that very restaurant to be closed. Did any of the Democrats say, you know what, maybe we should ask people who run businesses what they think? Maybe we should ask people who run businesses how they're being hurt by the kinds of things we're doing. The 1972 Democrat candidate for president was George McGovern. Was in Senate for a long time. And when he retired, he bought an inn, bed and breakfast inn, in New England. Always wanted to, one of his dreams. Got the best people to consult with him and bought it. And it went bust. And one of the reasons it went bust, he said, was because of all the rules and regulations that he was forced to abide by, many of which he didn't think were valid, and wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal. And he said something to the effect of, I only wish I had known more about how the private businesses are really run. I only wish I'd had real private business experience. I would have had a greater appreciation for the effect that the kinds of things we do in D.C. have on people who are simply trying to make a profit by running a business. Hello? Is this thing on? 888-971-SAGE. Now, Mike is in Clearwater, Florida. Mike, always nice to hear from you.
Larry, how are you, sir?
I'm well.
So here's the thing. I think a lot of our problems stem with the fact that our justice system is not fair, is not honest. People that shouldn't go to jail end up going to jail. People that need to go to jail don't end up going to jail. You know, look, let's go far back in the 80s, Iran-Contra. Last time I checked, nobody went to jail for that. And they probably got maybe probation or a slap on the wrist. Now, Larry, what do you think would have happened if you or I sold arms to the Iranians and turned around and gave the money to some? We would be under the jail, okay? Not in the jail, but under the jail. I don't know, Larry. I think it's really bad because even with the Epstein files, they released them, but I got to tell you, Larry, I don't think we've been given the whole set of files. I think there's a lot of information that they're going to keep close to their chest.
I think you're right about Iran-Contra. As I recall, there were some people that were prosecuted. I'll check it out. That was some time ago in the 80s. The lawfare against President Trump, this ridiculous lawsuit that Letitia James filed against him, claiming that somehow he bamboozled bankers into giving him loans by inflating the value of his businesses. Banks have their own appraisers. Banks weren't complaining. Banks said they weren't cheated. In fact, they got their money back, principal plus interest, and said they would do business against him again. yet she ends up getting a judgment, I think, with penalties now, it's almost $500 million. It's ridiculous. And then Alvin, and by the way, she ran promising to get Donald Trump, which is the opposite of what a prosecutor is supposed to do. A prosecutor is supposed to do justice, not get people. Alvin Bragg, same thing. Brought some cockamamie criminal charge against Trump for calling the payments to Stormy Daniels a campaign expense. The so-called dossier that Hillary and the DNC paid for was described as a campaign expense. Nobody got prosecuted. And then the documents charged against President Trump for allegedly having documents he shouldn't have, when Joe Biden had more documents in more places, and because at the time he had never been president, didn't have the ability to declassify the documents. That one fell apart. And the January 6th insurrection investigation, that fell apart. And the Fonnie Lewis one in Georgia fell apart. The whole Russia collusion thing, 2.5 years, fell apart. Scientists talk about the fine-tuning of the universe. But what if it's more than just fine-tuning? What if it's a cosmic code, meticulously programmed? Consider this: the precise strength of gravity, the specific mass of a proton, the exact speed of light. Alter any of these by even a hair's breadth, and the universe as we know it, life itself, would be impossible. We're not talking about a lucky roll of the dice. We're talking about conditions so incredibly specific, so perfectly balanced, they defy astronomical odds. Is this simply a coincidence, or is there an underlying design? The Story of Everything invites you to explore the mathematical beauty and the scientific puzzles that point to an intelligent origin. Tune in to The Story of Everything and uncover the hidden blueprint of existence. Visit thestoryoferything.film. That's thestoryoferything.film. In theaters for just 1 week starting April 30th, go to thestoryoferything.film and get tickets, thestoryoferything.film. Next hour, we're going to talk to Dr. Stephen Meyer, who's featured in the film, and whose book is the foundation of the film. So stick around for that. Thestoryoferything.film.
DJ saved my life. Last night a DJ saved my life with a song.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel coming to you from the Relief Factor studio. Don't forget your Relief Factor. 800-4RELIEF, 800 the number 4RELIEF, or ReliefFactor.com. That's ReliefFactor.com. We're going to get to Iran. But there's just a new poll, California poll, Emerson College, just released. 60% of California voters says Governor Gavin Newsom should not run for president in 2028. Now, when you consider only about 25% of voters in California are Republican, that means a boatload of Democrats and independents do not want this man to run for governor. His overall approval-disapproval rating, 42% approve, 40% disapproval. I said this before. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota had enough self-respect to drop out of his race for re-election after all the fraud was exposed in Minneapolis. The fraud in California looks like it's 10 times the fraud that so far has been uncovered in Minnesota. Did Gavin Newsom have enough self-respect to say, you know what, maybe I have been exposed as an incompetent manager of the state of California, incompetent executive, and maybe I ought not run? Maybe I ought not run because California has the highest unemployment rate in the nation. Maybe I ought not run because California is losing population. Those leaving have significantly higher income than those who are coming, meaning the tax base is becoming eroded. Maybe I ought not run because, given my policies, the pressure to try and force Californians to buy EVs, Gas prices highest in the nation, higher than Hawaii, where they have to ship in the gasoline. Maybe given the schools that used to be rated number 1 in the nation, now rated number 47. I had my own kid in private school. Maybe I'm not the kind of guy that should be leading America. And given the fires we've had, and the fact that there's been the same water infrastructure in California than it was when the state was half its size. What does that have to do with Gavin Newsom? Well, his fingerprints are on everything. He's been around so long. 8 years mayor of San Francisco. And he said by the end of his second term as the mayor of San Francisco, I will solve the homeless problem in my city. Have you been to San Francisco? And then for 8 years, he was lieutenant governor. And soon it'll be 8 years having been governor. So this man has been a public figure, major public figure, for decades. Yet now he wants to run for for president of the United States. With a record like that? And the issue's affordability? Are you kidding me? Again, he's the one who signed the bill to increase the minimum wage for fast food workers to $20. And there are at least 2 studies showing thousands of fast food workers are no longer working. As I said earlier, Pizza Hut laid off 1,200 in one day when he signed the bill months before it went into effect. This is what we got here. Tax, spend, regulate. And of course, rich people are not paying, quote, their fair share in taxes. Even the Washington Post recently said, in an editorial, not op-ed piece, editorial, rich people are paying more than their fair share in taxes. Compared to their share of income, they're being overtaxed. I didn't say it. The Heritage Foundation didn't say it. Fox News didn't say it. Newsmax didn't say it. The Washington Post. Does it matter? And regarding the minimum wage, one more time, there was an editorial, again, not op-ed piece, editorial in the New York Times, 1987. Headline, Ideal Minimum Wage 0.00, meaning there ought not be a minimum wage. New York Times made all the arguments. Causes people to get laid off. Causes people with very low skills not to get hired in the first place. It means you don't get that first job. Causes hours to be cut. New York Times. And then fast forward, the New York Times endorses now minimum wage. Did the laws of physics change? Did Econ 101 change? No, they changed. And I've told you many times about that left-wing, Trump-hating economist named Paul Krugman. He won a Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize had to do with free trade. He once wrote disparagingly about the minimum wage, or about a living wage proposal, which was the same thing. He said it was going to cause jobs to be lost. Fast forward, 180, just like the New York Times did a 180. Now all of a sudden he supports the minimum wage after having written negatively about it. Jonathan Gruber, the MIT prof, he was the father of Romney Care in Massachusetts and one of the authors of Obamacare. He too wrote negatively about the minimum wage. As far as I know, he's not done a 180. Virtually every major economist says that when you force by gunpoint labor costs to increase, it's got all sorts of negative, unintended consequences. Yet they do it anyway. And even some Republicans who should know better have supported a higher minimum wage. Rick Santorum, former senator, supported a higher minimum wage. Republicans ought to know better, but many of them still do. Don't know whether it's because it's popular or whether it's because they know nothing about economics 101. Either way, very, very disappointing. The percentage of black workers during the Reagan era increased, and during the entire 8 years of his presidency, he never increased the minimum wage. There was a minimum wage law that went into effect shortly after he became president, but he had nothing to do with that. But for 8 years, he never raised minimum wage. Unemployment for blacks increased faster than for whites, for Hispanics than for whites. As I said to Tavis Smiley when he told me that I was wrong, and he would get the actual documents on my desk on Monday. That was, 12 years ago, Mr. McConnell? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those words weren't written for history books. They're written for you. But it's hard to pursue happiness when pain is part of everyday life. Relief Factor was created to help people address inflammation, one of the most common causes of ongoing aches and pains from aging, overexertion, and daily living. It's a 100% drug-free, research-based formula that works through multiple metabolic pathways to support comfort and mobility. No prescription, no masking symptoms, just relief so you can keep moving forward. I've told you about my buddy Tom, avid golfer, scratch golfer, wouldn't be able to swing freely because of shoulder and back pain without Relief Factor. As America celebrates 250 years of independence, give yourself a chance to reclaim yours. Try Relief Factor today for $19.95. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com, or 800-4-RELIEF, 800 the number 4 relief.
Hey Larry, this thing with the law, Southern Law Poverty Center has a name. What's going on? It's called Going Jesse Smollett 2.0.
888-971 SAGE 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are still on the news channel regarding the Southern Poverty Law Center. Chuck Schumer is angry about the investigation against them. We're going to talk about that later on. We'll talk about Iran, top of the hour. We're also going to talk to Dr. Stephen Meyer, who's featured heavily in the film The Story of Everything, which you can get on thestoryofeverything.film, about the origin of the planet Earth, of life on Earth, and of the universe. And the question it asks is there any other way of explaining this other than that there is an intelligent design, a creator, God? By the way, the poll I mentioned, Newsom, 42% approval, 40% disapproval, that was from February. Now it is 33.4% of voters approving, 42.4% disapproving, with nearly a quarter neutral or no opinion. So the majority of people in California don't want this dude to run. His poll ratings are lower, probably lower than he's ever had in his career. And the director of the Emerson poll said, quote, "The results are not too surprising considering given Newsom's approval-disapproval rating in this poll, which is significantly lower than his 40% approval-disapproval rating in a February poll from Emerson," end of quote. Now, if you watch the debate, you'll know why. Nobody criticized this man at all. In fact, one even praised him, gave him an A for how he deals with homelessness. Here's what Steve Hilton said about the debate, number 17.
It's incredible. These Democrats, they just treat people like fools. I mean, we can all see it. We walk past it every day, and it's getting worse, not better, even though they've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars of our money actually making the problem worse. And the thing that struck me about that debate last night, Sean, was that basically they're all the same as each other, these Democrats, and all the same as what we've got now, except in some cases even worse. You look at Tom Steyer, the billionaire climate fanatic, he's far to the left of Newsom. He's running around pandering to every leftist activist group, all the unions. It could get worse, even than Newsom. That's why we've got to win this year, and I think we will.
And when asked what grade would you give Newsom on homelessness, we have the highest number of homelessness than any other state here in California. Xavier Becerra, who was the former AG here in California, also the head of HHS during the Biden administration, gave him an A. How in the world can you walk around downtown and some neighborhoods in California and give Gavin Newsom an A for dealing with homelessness? And as Hilton pointed out, around $30 billion have been spent in order to deal with this problem. It's only gotten worse, and nobody knows where the money went. 888-971-SAGE.
Where you from? You sexy thing, sexy thing.
So let's get her teed up!
You want to play what? Say hello to my little friend. What the hell's going on out here?
That's a bingo.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. A number of people want to weigh in, so I'm going to break protocol and go to the phones now, and then talk about Iran later on in the show, because next segment, and maybe for the rest of that hour, we're going to talk to Dr. Stephen Meyer, who's featured in the documentary The Story of Everything, which is a fascinating documentary about the origins of life on Earth, the origin of the universe, and whether or not you can explain this in any way other than that there is an intelligent designer, a creator, or dare I say God. It is called The Story of Everything, and you can get tickets, thestoryoferything.film, and it runs for 1 week starting on April the 30th. Dave is in Sacramento. Speaking of California, Dave, you're on the Larry Elder Show. Thank you so much for calling.
Hi, Larry. You mentioned that there must be California Democrats and independents who don't want Newsom to run for president. Mm-hmm. But many of them may feel that way because he's not left enough, and they want a more aggressive president candidate because they've been so hurt by Trump. So I don't think it's Republican good news.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, maybe that's why. A quarter of them are neutral with no opinion about his job. But yeah, it might very well be the case that Democrats don't like him because he's begun to say a few things that sound a little more commonsensical, although he still won't say whether or not he wants biological men to compete against biological women. Phil is in Carson, California. Phil, you're on the Larry Elder Show.
Hey, Larry. Two quick things off tangent. Real quick, I love your music that you put in there.
Thank you.
That's number one. And I haven't talked to you since Sylvia was your screener. But today, I heard a commercial for Spire.
Right.
And he's going to go to Sacramento and demand the legislators remove the fuel tax.
Yeah, I saw that.
Because California, did you?
Yeah. I saw that in the commercial. Here's a guy who's an environmental extremist, which is why we have the highest prices because of the fuel that we have in California that no other state has in order to combat climate change. But now he wants to eliminate the fuel tax, at least temporarily, because the prices have gotten so high because of policies that he's been pursuing. Hello?
Yeah. Isn't this amazing? People ask for it. Wow, it's just beyond them.
Yeah, it's like what I said about Zohran Mamdani. He gets elected. 70% of the people in East Village, New York, voted for this guy, and he wants to put a homeless shelter in East Village, and now they're suing him to stop him from doing it. This is what you guys voted for. What did you think was going to happen? Caroline is it Felon, California?
Yes, Phelan.
Phelan, okay. Not Felon.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday, Larry.
Thank you so much.
I heard this morning.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, happy birthday.
Aren't you going to ask me what I'm going to do for my birthday?
That's up to you.
Well, the answer is Nina asked me where I wanted to go for dinner, and I said I want to go to Carney's. Do you know Carney's?
No, I don't know any place down there. I live up here on the high desert.
Okay, I understand. It's a hot dog place. And Nina wouldn't be caught dead there. Somebody might see her, but that's where I want to go. She said, you want to go here? You want to go here? You want to go here? I said, no, I want to go to Carney's. She said, Carney's? I said, yeah, sometimes you just feel like a hot dog.
Hey, that's great. That's great, Larry. Well, right. You do whatever you want to do. It's your day, okay?
Okay, you got it, Caroline. Thank you so much for the call. I appreciate it. John is in Los Angeles. John, you're on the Larry Elder Show.
Larry, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, sir. How are you?
All right. All righty. I'm a long-time listener. All right. So let me pass this by you, Larry.
Mm-hmm.
President Obama was commander-in-chief. Some of the crimes that are speculated occurred as he was commander-in-chief. Now we have a new commander-in-chief in Donald J. Trump. Is there a way that Donald J. Trump can make referrals to the military for a tribunal on crimes that Barack Obama did as commander-in-chief.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you for the call. Barack Obama is the one that authorized what's called Operation Arctic Frost, claiming that the Russians and Donald Trump colluded to get him elected. Now, it turns out, we know this because of all the documents that have been disclosed under Trump 2.0, that the intelligence community did not believe that the Russians were trying to get Donald Trump elected. They believed that the Russians were interfering, no question about that, but they were just doing it to sow chaos, so that no matter what happened, the results would not be believed by the American people. And, of course, nobody thought Donald Trump was going to win, particularly Barack Obama. Remember that joke he made about Barack Obama will never be, Donald Trump will never be president? Then, lo and behold, Donald Trump gets elected president. So what did Obama do? Called in the same intelligence officials and had them to draft up a new assessment, and this assessment concluded that the Russians were attempting to get Donald Trump elected. And that's now been uncovered, and there is an ongoing investigation about that. Now, whether Barack Obama will ever be indicted, I doubt it. But we wouldn't have even known about this had Donald Trump not been reelected. Again, what this man has gone through is just absolutely incredible. I don't think any public figure, certainly not a presidential figure, has ever gone through what this man has gone through. All this lawfare, all the 2.5-year collusion, Russia BS, the Fonnie Lewis lawsuit, the Jack Smith lawsuit about January 6th, insurrection. Bunch of idiots rioted. It was stupid, it was wrong, it was unlawful, but insurrection? Even Mike Pence, who ran against him in 2024, said that Donald Trump did nothing illegal. Even Mike Pence, I repeat, said Donald Trump did nothing illegal. Donald Trump wanted Pence to not certify certain states. Pence refused, but Pence did not feel that the request/order was illegal. And the idea that there were no shenanigans, which is widely believed. I watch CNN all the time. Jake Tapper recently said there's no evidence whatsoever that there was anything wrong with 2020. Are you kidding me? I urge you again to watch the speech by John Eastman, which is on Rumble, for the American Freedom Association, I think it was called, the AFA. I was there. And he described in detail shenanigans/irregularities/illegalities that took place in places like Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Yet the man has lost his license to practice law. When have you heard a lawyer losing a license to practice law because of a legal theory that people don't support? It's just stunning. Thank you so much for the call. I appreciate it. Antoinette is in Sunset Beach. Antoinette, always nice to hear from you.
How do I start? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. It almost was, Mr. President, Mr. Larry Elder. Happy birthday to you.
Antoinette, thank you very much for that. Now, let's talk about some of the love that President Trump has been getting. This is Al Green promising that Donald Trump will be impeached again as soon as the Democrats take over the House. Number 24.
There ought to be those among us who are willing to show and stand and say, this is what he merits for his dastardly deeds done that are contrary to the Constitution, that are impeachable by virtue of being high crimes and misdemeanors. Yes, let's let the record show that he was impeached again. He doesn't want to be impeached. And there are people here who want to impeach him, but they don't want to say so. I understand it. Well, I'm saying so. He should be impeached. And I assure you that when all is said and done, when the last word is written, after all of this kind of insidious behavior, when the last word is said and the last word is written, we, the people,
oh, he's
will
taking
have
a bold stand, coming out for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Really? Dr. Stephen Meyer up next. I'm Larry Elder.
I just want to tell you right now that I believe, I really do believe that something's got a hold on me here.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. My guest is the New York Times bestselling author, including a book called Return of the God Hypothesis. He earned his Ph.D. from Cambridge. He is the director of the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute in Seattle, Washington. Please welcome my guest. He's featured in the new documentary called The Story of Everything. To see it, storyofeverything.film. Please welcome to the program Dr. Stephen Meyer. Dr. Meyer, thank you for taking the time.
It's really nice to be with you, Larry. Thank you for making time.
Now, Doctor, I watched the documentary. I was fascinated by it, riveted by it. But it occurred to me, after I watched the documentary, the film kind of asked the question, given the complexity of life and the universe, the things that would have to happen in order for the life and universe to come to fruition, there has to be some sort of intelligent designer or creator or maybe even God. My mom grew up on a farm, Dr. Meyer, and my grandfather had very little, if any, education. And we were watching the birth of piglets once in the barn. And I said, Grandpa, do you believe that there's a God? He said, that's about the only thing that can explain all this. So it seems to me you have all these scientists, Dr. Meyer, with all this education, all these years, all this money spent obtaining an education, and basically many of them, according to the documentary, came to the same conclusion my grandfather did.
Exactly right. It's the wisdom of common folk who actually work and know things, right? My dad was an engineer and came to faith late in life after I showed him some of the an animation of what's going on inside the cell and the little machinery that the digital code and the DNA makes, and that lit the fire for him. But a lot of people, especially in an agricultural world, when they know about the process of birth and just what seeds do and the patterns of the seasons, I think many people throughout the ages have had the sense that there's a mind behind all this, and it's kind of ironic that the people with a great deal of education are finally returning to that conclusion as well.
Now, Doctor, did you always feel this way? Did you grow up faith-based and came to the conclusion that there had to be some sort of intelligent designer through your work as a physicist, or did you always feel this way and your work has confirmed it?
It's a bit of a combination of the two, in that I had a long period of a kind of existential anxiety about the meaning of life when I was a teenager. I was actually deeply depressed and concerned that I kept asking the question, what's it going to matter in 100 years? It didn't seem like there was anything that had any lasting meaning or value. And eventually I came to faith largely through a process of philosophical deliberation and discovering the message of the Bible. But after I got out of college and finally settled in my faith, I started praying for guidance and wanting to do something to express that faith in a public way. And a year or two later, I attended a conference where scientists were discussing these big questions of origins. And I was shocked to find that the theistic scientists, the ones who believed in God, seemed to have the much better arguments. And so when I set out for graduate school in Cambridge, England, I had become fascinated with the question, especially the question of the origin of the first life, which is one of the key things we look at in the film, but also other big questions about the origin of the universe itself. So I was always interested in these questions of the intersection of science and philosophy, or science and religion. And the film tells the story of other scientists who have been similarly fascinated and who, because of recent scientific discoveries, have been coming back to belief in God, not in spite of scientific evidence, but because of scientific evidence.
You talk also in the film about Darwin, who gave us, of course, the theory of evolution. Even he essentially said, I'm not quite sure if there isn't an intelligent designer that started all of this.
Well, he was candid about the limits of his theory, and I wrote the second book I wrote was called Darwin's Doubt, and it was about the origin of the animal forms that arose very abruptly in the fossil record. So Darwin never repudiated his theory. He believed he had the right theory, but he acknowledged that there were many things his theory couldn't explain. And one of those was the abrupt appearance of new forms of life in the fossil record. Another, which we address in the film, is the presence of systems that have many different parts that are all integrated, functionally integrated to perform a function. In Darwin's time, he was painfully aware that he couldn't explain the origin of the eye. In the film, we look at little tiny miniature machines that have been discovered inside our cells and inside the cells of bacteria, showing that even these allegedly very simple cells are chock full with exquisitely engineered nanotechnology, and in addition, a whole suite of digital information stored in DNA that builds these miniature machines. So we've got a complex information storage, transmission, and processing system that builds exquisite nanotechnology, miniature machinery. It's not at all the simple cell that Darwin thought about in his time.
Dr. Meyer, my colleague here at Salem, Dennis Prager, just wrote a book called If There Is No God, ... And the movie, of course, explores that. So let's take that tact. If there is no God, then what? Therefore what? How do you explain life, explain the universe, if there is no God?
Yeah, we have no explanation for then the origin of the universe. This is one of the big things we look at, is the evidence now that we have from astronomy and cosmology that the universe itself had a definite beginning a finite time ago, before which, since the universe includes all matter, space, and time and energy, there was no matter to do the causing, or we could say, since time began, then independent of which there was no matter to do the causing. So we have we can't really explain the origin of the physical universe. We can't explain the origin of the information or the code that we find in life. Bill Gates says that DNA is like a software program, but much more complex than any we've ever created. Well, we know that software comes from a master programmer. We know that information, especially in a digital form, as we find it in DNA, always comes from a mind. So apart from the postulation of a transcendent mind, we really have no good explanation for the origin of life either. And then we have other things like we have no account of the objective basis of morality. We have no basis for believing that there's an ultimate meaning to life. Meaning is only something that is conferred by persons, and yet we all die. So if there isn't a transcendent person beyond the universe who is the creator of all things, there's really no hope of ultimate meaning to human existence, which is one of the things that many of the scientific atheists themselves discussed, and the kind of hopelessness of the scientific materialist worldview. So there are a lot of consequences to the so-called, the philosophical, what the philosophers call the death of God. But what we're showing in the film is that there's no reason to believe that God is dead, just the opposite. We have evidence of a powerful creative mind behind the universe.
Dr. Meyer, can you stick around for one more segment?
Absolutely.
We come back. You talk about Einstein in the documentary. I want to talk to you about him and what he thought. 888-971-SAGE. The story of everything.film. The story of everything.film. Don't go away. Triple 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. Larry Elder, Salem News Channel, coming to you from the Relief Factor studio. Don't forget your Relief Factor, 800-4-RELIEF, 800-4-RELIEF. relieffactor.com. That's relieffactor.com. My guest is Dr. Stephen Meyer, featured in the film The Story of Everything. If you want to see it, thestoryofeverything.film. Dr. Meyer, the film talks a lot about Einstein and Einstein's sort of evolution as well. Talk to us about that.
Well, it's a fascinating story, Larry. Einstein developed a new theory of gravity in 1915 that he realized had an implication that he didn't really like. The theory of his theory of gravity was that matter bends space or warps space, what he called space-time. And he realized if that was true, and if gravity were to be the only force operating in the universe, we should live in a universe where all the matter is bunched together into one big black hole. But we don't live in that kind of a universe. We live in a universe where there's empty space between massive bodies. So he realized there also had to be an outward pushing force, which he called the cosmological constant, a constant outward pushing force. And that was so far so good. He had to account for empty space. But then he made a further move to obscure the implication that he didn't like. The implication of his theory of gravity was that, and this outward pushing force, is that the universe is expanding outward from a beginning point. But instead, he believed that the universe, the physical universe, was eternal and self-existent. It had always been here, so it didn't need a creator. And so he didn't like the idea of the universe having a beginning. So he fiddled with his equations to make the outward push and the inward pull of gravity exactly balance, so he could portray the universe as a static system that was neither expanding nor contracting, neither expanding outward from a beginning nor contracting towards an end point. But then, as I like to say in my book, the heavens talked back, and an astronomer named Edwin Hubble discovered that, in fact, the universe is expanding. The galaxies in every direction are moving away from us. And so in 1931, Einstein actually went out to Southern California, here in Southern California where I am, near the Mount Wilson Observatory. And we have some famous newsreel footage in the film where Einstein is looking through Hubble's telescope, seeing the evidence of the expanding universe, which implied, again, that there was a beginning to everything. And 2 weeks later, Einstein gave an interview in the New York Times in which he said the three hardest words in the English language: "I was wrong." That paraphrase. He acknowledged that Humason and Hubble, the two astronomers, had shown that the universe was not static, and therefore it must have a beginning. What he actually said later was that his fiddling with his own equations to obscure that reality of a creation event was the biggest blunder of his life.
Speaking of creation, Dr. Meyer, unless I missed it, I don't believe the documentary said anything about Genesis and its description of how the universe was created. What is your take on Genesis, and how does that apply to how you feel about life and the universe?
That's a great question. One of the scientists that we examined as far as his work was a man named Arno Penzias. And Penzias discovered in the 1960s something called the cosmic background radiation, which was a very strong confirmation of what we now call the Big Bang Theory. And Penzias himself, reflecting on that, he won the Nobel Prize, but reflecting on the evidence that we have for a beginning, realized that exactly confirmed the first words of the book of Genesis, which is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. For centuries, physicists had been committed to the idea of an eternal universe that had no beginning and would have no end, and therefore would need no external creator. If matter and energy are eternal and self-existent, you don't need to explain where they came from. But Penzias realized that we now had evidence of the beginning, just as the book of Genesis said, and so he was quoted as saying that the best data we have are exactly what I would have expected if all I had to go on were the first 5 books of Moses, including the book of Genesis, of course, and the Bible, the Psalms and the Bible as a whole. So in the new cosmology, there's a striking confirmation of a long-standing teaching of the biblical text, right from the first chapter of Genesis.
The documentary talks about Mars being the most Earth-like planet in our solar system, yet there's no complex life as we know it, if any, on Mars. And you talk about how just a few little things going either way would have made Earth like Mars, in which case no life.
Yeah, exactly. There's one of the scholars in the documentary is Jay Richards, and he's written a book with astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez called The Privileged Planet, in which they document all these amazing parameters that have to be just right for our planet to host life. We have to have the right axial tilt, the right distance from a host sun, the right mass, the right amount of with the right amount of gravity to hold the right gases in place so that we have oxygen to breathe. We need a magnetic field to protect us from solar radiation. We need the right kind of sun or a star. The right kind of moon, the right distance away to ensure that we have tides that keep the oceans moving and refreshing, and on and on and on it goes. And so we really are a privileged planet. And I was just reading some of the accounts of the astronauts, including Victor Glover, talking about...
Doctor, let me borrow you for another segment if you can. Don't go away.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Dr. Stephen Meyer.
Stop here? Yeah.
For 250 years, Americans have believed in one powerful idea, that we were meant to live free to work hard, free to move, free to enjoy life without being held back. But if everyday aches and pains are slowing you down, it might be time to declare your independence from pain. I've told you about how my brother Kirk had difficulty going up and down the stairs in the morning until he followed my advice, began taking Relief Factor. Relief Factor is a 100% drug-free, research-based formula designed to help your body fight inflammation, one of the root causes of pain. It's not a quick fix or a temporary mask. It works from the inside out, at the source. Relief Factor was created so people could get back to living life on their terms, walking, working, exercising, and enjoying the moments that matter. This year, as we celebrate 250 years of American independence, take a stand for your freedom. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com, 800-4-RELIEF, 800 the number 4 relief. 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. My guest is Dr. Stephen Meyer, Director of the Center for Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute in Seattle. We're talking about the documentary in which he's featured called The Story of Everything. You can see it by going to thestoryoferything.film. Opens up later on this month. Doctor, the Big Bang Theory, the term, I think the film said initially the person that came up with the term did it as a derisive term. Talk to me about that.
Right. Yeah, this was Sir Fred Hoyle. Early in his career, he was a really strident scientific atheist, and he didn't like the idea of the Big Bang because it smacked of the Genesis 1 account, which affirmed that the universe had a beginning. And so he on a BBC interview called it the Big Bang, thinking he was stigmatizing the theory with a kind of pejorative term. But the term stuck, and it's now the term that the physicists themselves use to describe the theory. Many people get confused about the Big Bang Theory, thinking that the scientists are saying that the Big Bang caused the universe to come into existence, and therefore it's a kind of anti-God or anti-theistic theory. But the Big Bang theory is not a theory about the first cause, but rather about the first effect, that there was a beginning to the entire universe, before which, or independent of which, there was no matter or energy there to cause the universe to come into existence. So the Big Bang Theory raises an ultimate question of what caused the universe to come into existence, recognizing that it couldn't be matter and energy. So the postulation of an immaterial God with a great mind and the power of volition ends up being the best explanation for the origin of the universe. It not only confirms the Genesis account, but the Big Bang Theory provides evidence for the existence of God.
Doctor, when you are asked this question, if the universe was created by an intelligent designer, a creator, who created the creator? How do you answer that?
Right. It's a famous objection to our thinking or the theory of intelligent design from Richard Dawkins. But here's the way I like to look at that. Every philosophical system or worldview has to posit something as what some scholars call the prime reality, the thing from which everything else comes. Materialists, scientific materialists, posit that matter and energy are the eternal self-existent things from which everything else comes. So they also have, as it were, an unmoved mover, a thing that you can't explain in terms of anything more primitive or simple. Theists have long said that the thing from which everything comes is the transcendent mind of God. And so you have two competing ideas of the prime reality. The question is not the question is which of those provides a better explanation for what we see. Now that we know that matter and energy, as best we can tell, had a beginning a finite time ago, matter and energy is a bad candidate to be the eternal, self-existent thing from which everything else comes. And instead, theism, an eternal, transcendent mind, is a much better explanation, in part because we see the universe coming into existence a finite time ago, and in part because when the universe comes into existence, the fundamental parameters of physics are finely tuned to allow for life. And as Sir Fred Hoyle himself said, when he finally came around, having discovered many of these fine-tuning parameters, he said, a common sense interpretation of the evidence suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics to make life possible. Fine-tuning, he said, supports a fine-tuner. So every system has to posit something as the basis of all reality. Theism, I think, posits something that's much more consistent with the evidence that we have from cosmology, physics, and biology.
Dr. Meyer, do you prefer the term intelligent designer, creator, or God?
Well, in my first two books, I argued for the existence or action of a prior designing intelligence of some unspecified kind. I was just looking at the evidence from biology. But when you bring the evidence from cosmology and physics in, you realize that the evidence for design dates from the very beginning of the universe. It's not something that any imminent intelligence like a space alien could account for. So really the best explanation of all the evidence we have about biological and cosmological origins is a creator with the attributes that traditional theists like Jews and Christians have long ascribed to God. So in my first books, I argued for intelligent design. In my last book, Return to the God Hypothesis, I argued not only for intelligent design, but the evidence supports a designing intelligence with the attributes that we typically associate with God.
Did you change your mind?
No, I was kind of building to that. I didn't want to overstate the case in the early books, and knew that from biology alone I couldn't make the case for a full God hypothesis. You really needed the cosmological and the physics evidence to complement the biological evidence to make the case that God is the designer. Because if you think about it, life comes into existence along the timeline. You know, we say 3.8 billion years ago, but that'd be about 10 billion years after the universe came into existence. So it might have been the case that there was some sort of intelligence within the universe that was responsible for life. But you can't say that when you begin to look at the design, the fine-tuning of the universe as a whole. No space alien could be responsible for the fine-tuning of the laws of physics that make its very existence possible.
Doctor, are we alone? And if the answer is yes, what does that say about a creator? And if the answer is no, what does that say about a creator?
I am completely agnostic on that topic. I don't know one way or another, but what I do know and what I'm confident of is that if there is life in the universe, it too is the product of intelligent design. All the different factors that have to go into making a life-friendly universe, then a life-friendly solar system, which we were talking about before the last break, and especially the factors that have to be just right to make the information that's necessary to build a living cell. Those things all suggest the need for intelligence. This isn't going to happen by undirected material processes, irrespective of how many planets there might be out there in the universe that might be roughly life-friendly. Getting from a life-friendly planet to an actual living organism is still a big jump that requires intelligent intervention.
Well, if you're still good to go, I'd like to borrow you for another segment. I want to ask you about what your fellow scientists feel. Are they theists? Are they agnostic? Are they atheists? How do most physicists, people that study what you study, believe? 888-971-SAG. Thank you so much for staying again, Stephen. Appreciate it. The film is called The Story of Everything. To see it, thestoryofeverythingfilm.com, storyofeverything.film. And my guest, as I mentioned, is the author of, among other things, The Return of the God Hypothesis, which is basically the foundation of this documentary, thestoryofeverything.film. Now, right now, our Jewish friends feel forgotten. There's a Jewish woman named Esther I'd like to talk to you about. In her home in Israel, Esther is living through days and nights of fear. Sirens sounding, rockets screaming through the sky, long stretches spent in a bomb shelter. 84 years old, Esther is elderly, fragile, and alone. Imagine that. No help, no food deliveries, no medical care, no one knocking at the door. In a war zone. But because of friends like you, Esther is not alone. Through the fellowship, you are there, bringing food, meeting urgent needs, and reminding Jewish people like Esther you are not forgotten. In times of fear and uncertainty, your compassion brings hope and help. Esther asks that you hear these words. To those who give, you are doing a very great mitzvah, a good deed. You give from your hearts. May God protect you. Your prayers for God's protection and for the peace Jerusalem give Jewish people, and for the peace of Jerusalem give Jewish people like Esther hope. Stand with Israel in prayer by visiting supportifcj.org. That's supportifcj.org.
I go down singing. We go dancing. Oh, you show for me.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243, Larry Elder, Salem News Channel. Our last 3.5 minutes with Dr. Stephen Meyer. Again, the film is called The Story of Everything. To see it, thestoryofeverything.film to get your tickets. Opens April 30th through May 6th in 600 theaters, although if it does well, and I predict that it will, it may be in theaters a lot longer. Dr. Meyer, your colleagues, other scientists, geophysicists, astronomers, cosmologists, are they believers? Are they agnostic? Are they atheists? What would you say?
Well, scientists, like everyone, are people, and they have competing, or they hold different worldviews or personal philosophies. But what the story of everything is essentially the story of many very prominent scientists who have been coming back to belief in God because of, not in spite of, the scientific evidence, particularly evidence about the origin of the universe and the origin of life. One of the scientists whose story is told in the film is a great cosmologist and astronomer named Alan Standage, who was here in Southern California at the Mount Wilson Observatory. He was a hard-bitten scientific materialist for a long time, but I heard him speak at a conference early in my career where he announced that he had had a religious conversion, in fact, to Christianity. And then he went on to explain the evidence in his talk. He told about all the evidence for the beginning of the universe, for a creation event. And there's a memorable clip from that talk in the film where he says, here is evidence for what can only be described as a supernatural event. There's no way this could have been predicted, or for that matter, explained within the framework of physics. You only get physics after you have a physical universe, and if the physical universe comes into existence at the beginning, you need some other kind of cause to account for that. And he ultimately concluded that the best explanation, the best causal explanation for the origin of the universe was what I call the God hypothesis. And we tell the stories of a number of prominent scientists who have had that same trajectory in their development of faith as a result of scientific discoveries. So the story is telling this, the film is telling the story of scientists who are reconsidering the existence of God based on scientific discoveries about the origin of life in the universe.
Doctor, what happens to us after we die?
Well, I'm a believing Christian myself, and therefore I believe in the possibility of eternal life as promised in the Scripture. There's no possibility of that if this material universe is all that exists. And this is something that the scientific materialists in the beginning of our film spell out. Richard Dawkins is very clear. He says, when asked by Piers Morgan, what happens when you die? He says, well, I'm either buried or I'm cremated. There's just nothing. There's nothing else. And I think that is a very hopeless philosophy that many of our young people have been exposed to in science and philosophy classes in university. And I think it's led to a kind of cultural nihilism where people really have a feeling of hopelessness. And I think one of the subtexts of this film is that that's not what the science is pointing to. The science is pointing to a transcendent personal God, and nothing can mean anything to a rock or an atom or a DNA molecule. Things only mean things to persons. So if there is a transcendent personal God, the question of meaning is back on the table, and there is hope for eternal life.
Dr. Meyer, thank you so much for taking the time. I took up a whole hour of your life. I appreciate it. The Story of Everything.film opens April 30th through May 6th. The Story of Everything.film. Dr. Meyer, thank you so much for taking the time. Fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on and for the extended conversation.
You got it. So let's get her teed up!
You want to play what? Say hello to my little friend! What the hell's going on out here?
Ooh, that's a bingo! 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. Let's turn our attention to the war against Iran, shall we? There's a host of a program called the Iran Breakdown. He's CEO of Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. His name is Mark Dubovitz. Here's what he wrote. If you told me a few years ago this is where we'd be on Iran, I'd have said you were high. Number 1, nuke program set back years, enrichment and reprocessing gutted, weaponization sites destroyed, Fordo inoperable, Natanz in ruins, a generation of senior nuclear scientists eliminated. Number 2, ballistic missile program crippled, monthly production down from 100 to nearly 0. Roughly half the regime's missiles and launchers destroyed. The IRGC Aerospace Force commander who ran the missile enterprise, dead. Number 3, air defenses devastated. American and Israeli air power dominating Iranian skies, with strike aircraft operating over the country with near impunity. Number 4, full economic warfare. Not just sanctions, but military pressure laid on top, naval blockade, near zero oil exports, choked imports, wrecked steel and petrochemical sectors, triple-digit inflation, and a currency that is effectively worthless. Number 5, regime decapitation. Khomeini dead. Larijani dead. Hundreds of senior IRGC intelligence, military, and besieged commanders dead, including the IRGC commander-in-chief, the armed forces of the chief of staff, the aerospace force commander, the younger Khomeini inheriting a hollowed-out regime with no supreme authority and a gutted command structure. Number 6, the region is turning on Iran. Gulf states shutting down the sanctions-busting, money laundering, and financial escape routes the regime has relied on for years. No Arab capital willing to throw Iran a lifeline. China and Russia providing limited support. Number 7, proxy network shattered. Hezbollah and Hamas heavily degraded. Houthi and political leadership taking direct Israeli strikes. The axis of resistance and the ring of fire are now more slogans than they are real threats. Syrian corridor severed. Assad is gone. The new government in Damascus is actively blocking Iranian arms to Hezbollah, arresting smugglers, and publicly declaring Syria will no longer serve as a transit corridor for Iran's terrorists. The land bridge to the Mediterranean that took decades to build is effectively closed. Lebanon pivoting west. With Hezbollah battered and supply choked, Israel and Lebanon have opened direct peace talks for the first time since 1983, aimed at a permanent agreement with Hezbollah's disarmament. Beirut now asserting that the Lebanese armed forces alone are responsible for national defense. This is a direct repudiation of Hezbollah's resistance claim. Speaking of Lebanon, this is the Lebanon ambassador to the United States about President Trump. Number 20.
Thank you so much, President Trump. Thank you for your leadership, for making sure to be presiding over this historic moment. I want to really say thank you to the United States under your leadership for all your effort to help and to support Lebanon. And I think with your help, with your support, we can make Lebanon great again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We can make Lebanon great again. Number 10. Deterrence exposed.
The integration of AI.
Deterrence exposed as a bluff. 4 direct attacks on Israel. April 24, October 24, June 25, March 26. Failed to impose a strategic cost and instead triggered heavy retaliation. Iran couldn't even use Syria as a launch pad. Next. Economy hollowed out from within. Power shortages, water crises, factory shutdowns, pension unrest, and mass protests. Nationwide demonstrations erupted in December 2025 after a year of economic freefall. Oil workers, truckers, regimes' traditional support joining strikes across all 31 provinces. Running out of oil storage space, fuel shortages, the worst crisis since 1979. Scientific and technical brain drain, Beyond the nuclear experts, Iran has lost a generation of irreplaceable expertise in missile design, centrifuge engineering, and weapons development. The survivors are harder to recruit and easier to deter. Naval power decimated. The regular Army shattered. IRGC Navy taking growing losses as CENTCOM moves to reopen Hormuz, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And against all of this, the regime forced to play its Hormuz card at its weakest possible moment when the U.S. has options instead of when. This is the strategic picture. It's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. Now, about the Strait. This is a national security analyst with a think tank called the Lexington Institute. Her name is Rebecca Grant, number 25.
To Operation Epic Fury, where President Trump has issued a shoot and kill order, writing on Truth Social, quote, "I have ordered the United States Navy to shoot and kill any boat that is putting mines in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. There is to be no hesitation. Additionally, our minesweepers are clearing the strait right now. I'm hereby ordering that activity to continue, but at a tripled up level." And the Pentagon posting a new video of U.S. troops seizing another ship carrying Iranian oil. National security and military analyst and international relations expert Rebecca Grant joins me now. Rebecca, thanks for coming on to talk about this with us this morning. First, I just want your reaction to this shoot and kill order.
Lethal force is absolutely appropriate. And notice that President Trump really focused on any attempt by Iran's fast boats to put mines out in the strait. Right now, we have a couple clear shipping channels that our U.S. Navy destroyers have ready to go, so we don't want to see more activity. Iran's IRGC Navy remnants are acting like pirates, but I'm telling you, they've only seen a glimpse of what the U.S. Navy could do. The U.S. is in control of that strait, and the U.S. needs to keep that control of the strait.
Do you think this is the pressure that Iran needs to face from the president to cave in and be like, we can't do this anymore?
You know, it's a brilliant move because with the blockade, President Trump can dial up or dial down the pressure. The U.S. Navy can continue this blockade as long as necessary. And it's amazing seeing the intercept of that Iran Shadow Fleet tanker in the Indian Ocean, okay? That's out in Indo-PACOM, Admiral Paparo's command. And so that tells us that Iran's Shadow Fleet is a target anywhere they are. That's a great message to China, and it really does lock down the pressure on Iran. They have no options at this point, and they are going to have to negotiate one way or the other.
Do you foresee this coming to an end anytime soon? We'll get to China in a second, but, for all the people out there who didn't want to see this happen in the first place, and now it's dragging on into the second and third month, I mean, what do you think? Do you think this is close to being over?
It's going to take some time. President Trump says give him the time and the space to make the best deal. And the point here is we still want the nuclear fuel, nuclear dust accounted for, and all the provisions to make sure Iran can never be a threat again and never be on that pathway to a nuclear weapon. It's going to take a little more time, but this blockade pressure is another key pressure point on Iran.
Senator Lindsey Graham, number 18.
We can enforce that. That's one way to do it. Maybe you go get it. But the bottom line here is that this war, by any reasonable measure, has been a disaster for the capabilities of the Iranians to produce a nuclear weapon, to terrorize the region, and to support terrorism. They have been hit hard in every way possible. And quite frankly, when it comes to their economy, the worst is yet to come for Iran. Wherever you're at, carrying Iranian oil, you may be in Asia. There
have now been, I think, 5 attempts by the Democrats to call the Iranian war an illegal war. Number 19 is Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland.
But they didn't, and so I'm not going to I'm not voting for one dime for this illegal war that Donald Trump started.
Barack Obama joined the Brits and the French bombing Libya, for 7 months. Did not go to Congress for approval. More on the Iran war when we come back. I'm Larry Elder. 888-971 SAGE 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. This is the former Deputy CENTCOM Commander, Vice Admiral Mark, number 26.
President Trump has authorized the United States Navy to destroy any Iranian fast boats that attempt to put mines in the water or disrupt passage through the Strait of Hormuz, to shoot and kill. Our commanders have clear rules of engagement. If Iran is putting mines in the water or otherwise threatening American commercial shipping or American forces, we will shoot to destroy. No hesitation.
Vice Admiral, I sometimes forget just how big Iran is. It's basically the size of Alaska. It's got a huge coastline. How realistic is it, or how difficult is it going to be to find those small little ships on a coastline that big?
Well, the Strait of Hormuz, the geography favors us in this particular case because the only place where the IRGC Navy is capable of constricting or attacking merchant ships really is in that about 20 or 21 mile strait. So I have no doubt that we have had an unblinking eye on that, and before we had a ceasefire. And so when I heard reports of small boats coming out and attacking merchant ships, I think that is the catalyst that created this change in our posture, even though there was a ceasefire where now we have authorization to strike and kill small boats coming out. I am confident that we have had a very, very strong surveillance and reconnaissance posture there and know where they're coming from and where they're going to. If they put mines in the water, I would expect that we know where they are. So there's a new wrinkle in the rules of engagement that now it's not a wrinkle, it's a big positive thing now to say, okay, you can kill those small boats if or when they come out.
As former Deputy CENTCOM Commander, Vice Admiral Mark Fox. And this is retired Admiral Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, number 16.
Strategically, what we ought to be doing is going after these small boats before they get underway. And that's a hard target because there's a lot of them, they're distributed. But we ought to go after the small boats. We ought to go after the mine-linking capability. We ought to go after the ballistic missiles. So try and shut down that Iranian capability to control the strait.
And I've said that the biggest card the Iranians have is not the Strait of Hormuz, it's the American left. This is Brett McGurk, Deputy Assistant to President Joe Biden, and he was also on the National Security Council, number 23.
It's an open question. There is another aspect to this, another headline that we're sort of tracking along the way, whether it's related to what's happening in the Gulf of Oman and Strait of Hormuz. We don't yet know. There aren't signals pointing in that direction, but it's still noticeable that as the U.S. Navy is embroiled in this massive operation with huge consequences, the Secretary of the Navy has just been removed. Right. What does that mean for that department?
So I think it means nothing in terms of the actual military operation in the Middle East. Secretary of the Navy is really not involved in that, not in the chain of command or anything like that. Secretary of the Navy is involved in equipping the force, training the force. But to the Iranians, they will look for any signal of disarray. And to them, the Secretary of the Navy, while we have this naval blockade, just resigned or was fired, that's I think in the Iranian mind, it's going to convince them that time is on their side, right? They're looking ahead, they're thinking, and this is how they think. I've sat across the table from the Iranians. They think we're very short term, and we can be very short term. They talk about our election cycles, our gas prices. So they're looking, say 6 months till midterm elections, to the Iranians is nothing. 6 months is nothing in terms of their overall time span. So I think they're settled in for a long haul. And the question is whether we can be settled in for a long haul in these two competing blockades. That's a very open question. And how do you increase enough pressure on Iran, perhaps to get them back to the table? The one thing I see right now, if you don't want to go back to the military campaign, which I don't think we should, I think we should try to keep this in the economic domain, is more diplomatic pressure, trying to bring others along with us. And that's the one thing right now that we have not done effectively.
And speaking of the diplomatic table, this is what Caroline Leavitt said this morning, number 27.
Look, as you know, and I spoke about it earlier this week, the president was flexible in granting an extension of the ceasefire throughout this time. The president has decided to dispatch Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner back to Islamabad. The Iranians want to talk. They want to talk in person. And so the president is, as I've said many, many times to all of you, always willing to give diplomacy a chance. So Steve and Jared will be heading to Pakistan tomorrow to hear the Iranians out. We hope progress will be made, and we hope that positive developments will come from this meeting, and we will see. And the president, the vice president, the secretary of state will be waiting here in the United States for updates, and the vice president, I understand, is on standby and will be willing to dispatch to Pakistan if we feel it's a necessary use of his time. Go ahead, Kristen.
The first one on Iran. With this group going, does that mean that the United States has gotten any kind of unified proposal from Iran, or are they going over there without any proposal from Iran?
We've certainly seen some progress from the Iranian side in the last couple of days. Again, the president has made the decision to send Stephen Jared to hear the Iranians out. And so we'll see what they have to say this weekend.
Second question on Kash Patel. Does the president still have full confidence in Kash Patel to lead the FBI?
The president does still have confidence in the FBI director and in our law and order team to do what they've been doing so well over the course of the last year and a half. As you know, Kristen, and I wish more people would cover it, the crime rates in this country have completely plummeted. We're at a 125-year low in murder rates across this country. You look at what's happened in Washington, D.C., new numbers released. Murders are down nearly 60% in our nation's capital, which is something I know as all of us live here, we can be very grateful for. So the president is grateful for the efforts of the great men and women of the FBI who are help making this happen. Karen, go ahead. Sure.
On that, what was his involvement, and why now after ratcheting up the rhetoric around that earlier?
As you saw, Judge Jeanine Pirro, or former Judge Jeanine, U.S. Attorney Jeanine now, put out a statement saying that the case is not necessarily dropped. It's just being moved over to the Inspector General, who has critical tools at their disposal to continue to look into the financial mismanagement at the Fed. This has obviously been a priority for the president. If you drive by the Fed building, the president has a point. This is a project that's been going on for a very long time. It's costing taxpayers billions of dollars, and I think it's in the best interest of the taxpayer to get to the bottom of it. So the investigation still continues. It's just under a different authority, and that's what you'll continue to see. Not to my knowledge. I don't know if the White House Legislative Affairs shop was in touch with the senator, but as we've always maintained, Senator Tillis should do the right thing and move to confirm Kevin Warsh as speedily as possible. He is a phenomenal candidate to lead the Fed, and we shouldn't be holding our nation's economy hostage because of a disagreement with the Department of Justice. Go ahead, Benny.
Can you share with us what led to this reclassification of the marijuana that the president just did the other day? There's a lot of stuff on social media, like a lot of the GOP isn't supportive of this, but I was just wondering if you could share kind of the process and what was behind it.
We'll talk about what the president has done to lower drug prices in a second, but since this conversation she had this morning, the DOJ has dropped its investigation against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell over cost overruns. The senator from North Carolina, Tom Tillis, said he wasn't going to approve the new Fed nominee until that case was dropped. It's now been dropped. I'm Larry Elder. 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. By the way, my birthday is not today. It is Monday. So some people are a little premature, but I'm feeling the love. By the way, are you still overpaying your wireless company? I've got something to help you. And to make a contribution to Food for the Poor, it's called SageWireless.com. Same nationwide network, plan from $25 to $60 a month, which is much lower than what you're paying right now. Keep your phone, keep your number, and a percentage of every bill feeds families through Food for the Poor. SageWireless.com. That's SageWireless.com. Dean is in Sacramento, California. Dean, you're on the Larry Elder Show. Thank you for calling.
Long-time listener. Thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure.
Mr. Elder. Okay, I'm going to try. No, thank you, sir. Let me try to get straight to the crest of it. I believe international water is 200 miles economically to near every economically every sovereign country begins at I believe 58 miles. The Strait of Hormuz at its widest point is 58 miles, the narrowest 21 miles. Now, due to economics, they do have a right to charge for the sovereign oil under their crest of their land, to charge, at least when they're charging $1 a barrel. That's equivalent in what it is rated financially to the, Bitcoin. That Bitcoin coming to China that they would trade that with is somewhat of an oxymoron, because America trades some of its financial electronic delinquency through China through Bitcoin. So I just don't see why they can't charge economically $1.
Okay, I got your question, Dean. Why until this war started were they not charging? They weren't charging anything.
They weren't charging anything at that time because their power plants hadn't been demolished, like Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Fukushima.
Yeah, but if your argument is that based on their geography they could have been charging, my question is, why weren't they charging before? And the answer is they weren't.
They weren't. They weren't. But now, since the demolish of their country's infrastructure, they have to charge to rebuild. But this president, once he goes in through the International Monetary Fund through back doors, are going to rebuild what they destroyed. That does not make any economical sense.
Well,
if you agree with that?
If the same regime stays in power with the same intention, no, it does not make any sense. And I think if the end of this war results in Iran charging a toll, charging $1 a barrel, that would not be a good result. I don't believe that's what the president is going to end up getting. I believe this is a hope. I believe that eventually enough Iranians are going to rise up and take control of their country. But even if they don't, as long as we have behavior change as opposed to regime change, no more pursuit of nuclear weapons, no more pursuit of their ballistic missiles program, and no more support of proxies, I'm good with that. And if that means we have to have some sort of naval force around them for an indeterminate period of time, not unlike we have tens of thousands of troops in Europe, tens of thousands of troops in South Korea, and tens of thousands of troops in Japan, I'm okay with that. The alternative is a nuclear-armed fanatic regime that chants death to America. And we know they have the capability to reach Diego Garcia. A lot of our intel community was shocked to find they could have a missile that went 2,500 miles away, which means they could strike every capital in Europe. The alternative is unacceptable. Now, there is a Atlantic writer, Atlantic is a left-wing journal, talking about Pete Hegseth. This is the kind of stuff that the Iranians are hoping will cause the American people to rise up against this war in Iran. He says that Hegseth promised to get rid of woke in the military, but he meant black and female senior officers. Didn't they just fire the Secretary of Navy? Wasn't he a white male? Number 22.
I guess, what does it say about Hegseth and his leadership when you take the firing of Phelan and the Army Chief of Staff and the woke culture purges all together?
Well, I would separate those two things, because Hegseth, when he first came in, really wanted to make his bones as, the guy that was going to turf all these woke, and by woke he means black and female senior officers. But I think what's going on now, and I think what you're seeing with Phelan, is Hegseth is very worried that he's going to lose his job, and so he's trying to repopulate the Pentagon and its environment with people who won't support him getting fired.
So he's going to get rid of all the senior female and black officers, but he fired Secretary of Navy, who's a white male. Got it. Every spam call, every scam text, every sketchy email with your name, each one starts the same way. Somebody found you. Your phone number is sitting on data broker sites as we speak. So is your home address, your email, your age, even the names of your family members. All of it searchable, all of it for sale, and scammers do not need to be hackers to get it. They just need Google in 5 minutes. Every scam starts with one thing, your personal info being available to the wrong person. So forget the spam filters, the call blockers, the real fix disappear. That's what Incogni does. They contact hundreds of data brokers and legally force them to remove your information. I use Incogni to get my name and info away from these data brokers. They can't spam you if they can't find you. 60% off, exclusive deal, Incogni.com/Larry, INCOGNI.com/Larry. Take back your privacy. 888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel, coming to you from the Relief Factor studio. Don't forget your Relief Factor, 800-4RELIEF, 800-4RELIEF, or ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com. This is a woman named Ashley Allison, former senior advisor in the Obama-Biden White House. Also advised the Biden-Harris campaign. She's on CNN. And listen to this hideous statement she makes with no pushback. Number 11.
But it was so racially charged because of what had happened just before with Rodney King, but also just how Black Americans feel about policing. It's not like O.J. Simpson was the leader of the civil rights movement of his era. You know, he wasn't a social justice leader, but he represented something for the Black community in that moment, in that trial, particularly because there were 2 white people who had been killed, and the history around how Black people have been persecuted during slavery. There were just so many layers. And I guess I would just close with this, is that there was racial tension then, there is racial tension now. It might not be the backdrop of the Trump campaign, but until this country is ready to actually have an honest conversation about the racial dynamics from our origin story till today, we will always have moments like O.J. Simpson that manifest, and our country will always be divided if we don't actually deal with the issue of race.
What does that even mean? Until we have an honest dialogue about race in America, we're always going to have these problems. O.J. Simpson represented something to the Black community because he killed 2 white people. This is a top advisor for Obama, Biden, and the Biden-Harris campaign. There was this massive study done by the Brookings Institution, which is probably the most prominent left-wing think tank, and Gallup. An analysis of relationships across race and their effects on work, family, and friendships. Let's go over some of it, shall we? It starts out by saying, you know, the racial narratives have often framed as one group in competition with another. Quote, this is ironic, given that economic and cultural modernization have made interracial contact and cooperation more common than at any other time in U.S. history. And they define what they mean by cooperation as voluntary, mutually beneficial exchanges, such as those that routinely occur in social and economic interactions. So they looked at interactions voluntary with people. Surveyed 5,000 U.S. adults, asking them extensive questions about their relationships at work, their friendships, their romantic relationships, their family ties. Team used scenarios to get responses regarding racial preferences and hiring decisions. They asked various questions about discrimination, about the importance of race and other characteristics when selecting friends and business partners. You know what they found out? Quote, explicit racial bias in business exchanges and friendship formation is rare. When evaluating whether to conduct business with someone, 87% of U.S. adults report that race of the candidate is not important to them at all. 87%. When reflecting on selecting friends, 83% gave that response. In hiring, race far less important than other factors. Among U.S. adults, 85% 5% expressed preferences in hiring that were race neutral. 10% expressed a preference for black candidates, and 5% expressed a preference for white candidates. So those expressing a preference for race more expressed a preference for blacks than whites. This thing on? Most U.S. adults, according to this survey, experienced interracial relationships at work. Almost all U.S. workers, 83%, have a client from a different race than themselves. 80% have one or more coworkers of a different race. Half have a boss, manager, or supervisor of a different race. Interracial friendships are common and successful. Over half of U.S. adults report having a close friend from another race. 72% have at least one friend from another race, whether close or not. Between friendship, contentment, the share of friends who are from different racial groups that differ from others, overall, no difference in close interracial friendships compared to those that are not of the same race. No difference. Among adults who are married or in long-term romantic relationships, approximately 35% of those under age 30 are in an interracial relationship versus 14% of adults 70 years or older. Large minorities of Americans, quote, reject racial bias when it comes to forging friendships or business relationships. As I mentioned, in the case of hiring, there's a small preference for black workers compared to white workers. In other words, all of this proves what I've been saying for a very long time. Racism in America has become almost insignificant. It is kept alive by race hustlers, by people like that woman I just now mentioned, Ashley Allison, by those who fake hate crimes like Jussie Smollett, groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center that are literally paying hate groups to stage protests so they can then point to the protests as evidence that racism remains a major problem, and then use that to argue that their relevance is necessary, and to use it to fundraise from people who claim that racism remains a major problem. So, when the supply of racism becomes low, it becomes necessary to manufacture new sources. And that's what the SPLC has done by paying the hate groups, the very hate groups that supposedly are set up to monitor, money to get out and stage protests. Part of the people on the protest in Charlottesville were paid by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is designed to go after hate groups. You cannot make this up. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those words weren't written for history books. They're written for you. But it's hard to pursue happiness when pain is part of everyday life. Relief Factor was created to help people address inflammation, one of the most common causes of ongoing aches and pains from aging, overexertion, and daily living. It's a 100% drug-free, research-based formula that works through multiple metabolic pathways to support comfort and mobility. No prescription, no masking symptoms, just real relief so you can keep moving forward. I've told you about my buddy Tom, avid golfer, couldn't pull off golfing almost every day, which he does, without Relief Factor because of shoulder and lower back pain. As America celebrates 250 years of independence, give yourself the chance to reclaim yours. Relief Factor, because freedom just feels better without pain. 3-way quick start is ready for you. ReliefFactor.com, ReliefFactor.com. 800-4-RELIEF, 800 the number 4 relief. Triple 8-971 SAGE 888-971-7243. I am Larry Elder. We are Salem News Channel. I'm not sure what to make of these two different polls about the California governor's race. One, a Emerson College poll conducted from April 14 to April 15. This is before the debate. Had Steve Hilton at 17%, Chad Bianco, also Republican, at 14%, tied with the billionaire Tom Steyer. But there's also one that came out around the same time, conducted around the same time, between April 14 and 20th, something called the Independent Voter Project. And they have Xavier Becerra, the former AG of California, the former HHS secretary, at 23%, with Hilton at 19.7% and Chad Bianco at 16.8%. Don't know which one is accurate. I do know this. The Democrats are going to do everything they can to make sure a Democrat is in the top two, if not both of them. Their belief is that if they square off against a Republican, particularly somebody like Steve Hilton, who's gotten endorsed by Donald Trump, believe me, every ad you see will have Steve Hilton standing next to Donald Trump. Same thing if Chad Bianco is the top Republican as opposed to Steve Hilton. Even though Trump has not endorsed Bianco, they'll find some picture with Bianco next to Trump and they'll show it over and over and over again. Or if they don't have a picture, they'll just have a picture of Trump and have a picture of Chad Bianco. But their goal is to make sure that there is a Democrat in the top two. And if they do that, they'll try to pull the same thing that Gavin Newsom did when he ran against a Republican named John Cox. Ever heard of him? Didn't think so. And that Adam Schiff did when he ran against a Republican, Steve Garvey, in the Senate race. President Trump talked about the historical agreement with drug manufacturers to lower drug prices. It was covered on Fox News Live. I caught on CNN. They weren't covering it. I caught on MSNBC. They were not covering it. Number 13.
During his first term, he held the line on drug prices for the first time in history. He came back on this term and he said, we're going to lower them this time no matter what. There's people in this room who are part of the White House staff who said we can't do that. Oz and I said we probably can't do that, but he harassed us. We were beleaguered. It was like Fort Apache.
And marijuana has long been classified as a Schedule I drug, which means highly addictive and no medicinal value. President Trump has reclassified it as a less dangerous drug to enable there to be more and more research about whether or not it has any kind of beneficial effects. I would have thought that even if you hated Donald Trump's guts, if you're on the left, you would have liked this. But will that alter your opinion of him as you're smoking a blunt? Probably not. I'll see you on Monday, everybody. God bless. Have a great weekend.
What can I say? Mamba out.
The mic has been dropped. All across America.
That's enough. Put down the mic.
The Larry Elder Show.
Andy Chrisman of For Him has spent 40-plus years in Christian music, and chances are he knows your favorite artist personally. Now he's bringing you their stories.
I'm Andy Chrisman.
In his new podcast, 1 Degree of Andy, he sits down with the voices behind the songs for real, honest, and faith-filled conversations you won't hear anywhere else.
That's a great question.
If you love Christian music, this is your backstage pass.
The 1 Degree of Andy podcast.
Listen now to 1 Degree of Andy wherever you get your podcasts.